Why do you think so many people are so reluctant to examine the origins of this virus and whether or not it came from a wet market or whether it did leak from a lab?
Well, there are many people who seem to be grabbing onto the seafood market theory, including the Australian government, which surprises me a little bit, but I think they're trying to be diplomatic here and not raise this really quite frightening prospect that in fact it was an accident and that it leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which we know is several kilometres from the wet market where the first major cluster occurred. But it's also true that many people take the view that if Donald Trump said it, then it must be a lie. And of course, Donald Trump took up the hypothesis that it was an accidental leak from a lab a couple of months after many other very credible sources, and especially Chinese scientists, started to put forward this hypothesis. So really people are blinding themselves to the possibility. Of course, the Chinese government has a huge stake in denying the possibility.
Look, Clive, what is some of the circumstantial evidence that suggests it may have come from a laboratory? And of course, there's no, firm intelligence either way on this, at least none that we know about, none that's public. But there is a circumstantial case that at least justifies an inquiry taking place.
Absolutely, and that's why I wrote an article yesterday saying that we really should keep an open mind on this because we must, like all good detectives, keep our minds open to all possibilities, particularly at this early stage. The evidence, well, the most important piece of evidence, I think, is the fact that the argument that the coronavirus emerged from the South China seafood market just no longer stacks up. There is just so much evidence now that some of the earliest cases of COVID-19 befell people in Wuhan and now increasingly elsewhere in the world who had no contact whatever with the seafood market or anyone who had anything to do with it. And this has been demonstrated by a number of top quality studies that have come out of China, have been published in top journals around the world. So the seafood, the idea that it originated in December sometime, usually late December, in this market simply doesn't stack up. So you have to ask yourself, well, how else could this pandemic have arisen? And the only other, at the moment, plausible explanation is that it was a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this hypothesis came from Chinese scientists themselves. And for several weeks, until the government stepped in and shut it down, it was all over the Chinese internet, not least a search all over China by netizens looking for the person who is believed to have been the first patient zero, a woman who worked at the laboratory, who seems to have disappeared off the face of the planet. And so there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, including one paper in particular, published by two highly regarded scientists in China, who drew that conclusion precisely, that the evidence suggests that the coronavirus came out of a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We have to take this hypothesis seriously.
And especially when you look at what that Wuhan lab was handling. They were handling the most dangerous viruses known to humankind. They'd been studying bat-like coronaviruses for years. They'd even genetically altered them to make them more deadly, more potent, and more transmissible to humans. So at the very least, Chinese authorities should allow Western governments to go in and have a look at the database of the Wuhan Institute of Virology and interview their senior staff.
Well, there's a good reason why this Institute of Virology is the only facility in China that has a level 4 biosecurity regime, because it handles the most dangerous viruses in the world, including a range of bat coronaviruses, which, as you say, you don't have to look back far into the scientific literature, such as an important paper in Nature in 2015, which demonstrates that researchers at this institute were engineering bat coronaviruses with American scientists. And so the potentiality is there for this extremely lethal virus to have escaped in some way. And we do know that within weeks of the epidemic beginning in Wuhan, President Xi himself, followed up by the relevant department, were issuing strict instructions to enhance biosecurity, and as Xi himself said, particularly from labs handling coronavirus. So when you put it all together, there is a very plausible hypothesis here that someone became infected in the laboratory, walked out and started to infect other people in Wuhan.
Yeah. Look, Clive, I've been writing many stories in the past couple of weeks about the links between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and also the PLA, the links to the CSIRO and other Australian universities. You've done a lot of research in this area. You've written a book on it. What are the national security risks, in your view, of having people linked to the Chinese government working in our high-level research institutions?
Well, the first thing that should be said is that there are some extremely capable, extremely competent, excellent Chinese scientists working in Australian universities who are no security risk and do fantastic work. On the other hand, we do know that there are Chinese scientists working in particularly the Group of 8 Australian universities who either have worked for the People's Liberation Army. They are scientists who actually have military rank, although they cover it up. And Australian universities have welcomed these people, even after it was pointed out that these people are actually connected to the PLA or PLA-linked universities. Australian universities have been doing a lot of covering up. They're very embarrassed about this and won't own up to it. But it's also true that a significant number of Chinese or Chinese scientists or scientists with Chinese heritage are associated with United Front groups, that is, China's Communist Party groups in Australia, and they also hold positions at universities in China, some of which have links to the Chinese military. And this has been a massive issue in the United States, and yet here in Australia we seem to not want to know about it.